You've heard me say it before, and you'll hear me say it again. The trucking industry is the backbone of society. It provides us with everything we need. And really, as individuals of this society that we live in, we need the commercial trucking industry and the fleets that operate inside of the industry to be successful. And that's what we're going to talk about today, how these fleets can be successful right now in 2022 and beyond. Looking forward to this conversation. My guest today is Josh Turley, the CEO of RTA Fleet and the co-author of the Fleet Success Playbook. Josh is a third-generation owner, and he is the CEO of RTA, the Fleet Success Company, as they're called. His passion and the mission of RTA is helping people work on their fleets rather than just in their fleets and day-to-day operations. Josh, welcome to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. So glad to have you here.
Hey, it's great to be here.
So with your mission of helping people work, on their fleets, not just in their fleets, you wouldn't by any chance be a disciple of Michael E. Gerber, would you?
Oh, just maybe, like maybe pivoting a little bit from E-Myth to the Fleet Myth.
Right. Exactly. I actually, in a previous podcast that I had called Build a Better Business, I interviewed Michael Gerber and got to know him. And what a great business guy. So any business owners out there, by all means, go read the E-Myth. But we're not here to talk about that book. We're here to actually talk about a different book, which I've got in my hands right here. So, Josh, one thing I noticed about you and everything that you're doing, you seem to be someone who is very passionate about creating intention in everything that people are doing in fleets. And you also have strong feelings about how important it is to use that intention in kind of opposition to being reactive, which often in our industry, we see a lot of people being reactive. Why is it that you feel so passionate about that? And what are some of the very specific drawbacks that come from having that more reactive approach?
So I think as far as why I'm so passionate about it, probably traces back to my grandfather. I mean, he kind of really started our whole company, started our whole movement. But personally, for me, I've seen what it's like when you kind of let life just lead you. And, you get to the end of the day and you just feel like, what did I get done today? And you just feel drained from that. And so for me, it kind of started off with that was this intentionality of just really setting out and saying, this is what I want to spend my time on. This is what I want to spend my life on. This is what I want to spend, like where we need to spend our money. And so as I've kind of taken some of the business lessons that I've learned from, people like Michael Gerber, people like Patrick Lencioni, who talk about really purposely creating the type of environment you want to have, purposely creating a strategy instead of just going on a whim. Because I've lived it and I've done it both ways. And I'll tell you is that it's much, much better if you can be intentional about it and course correct and say, yeah, we didn't do very good this time, but we know where we want to go. And so this is what we're going to do it better next time.
That's one of the things I particularly like about when you create like a system inside of your business, a methodical way about doing something. You're striving for like best practices. And if you have an actual system, you can measure it and you can say, did it create the result we were hoping for? No, it didn't. Okay, so now we can adjust. That's one of the biggest advantages I see to having that intentional approach. What other things do you see that's a real big advantage?
Being able to see basically the outcomes of the experiment, like you mentioned, right? But also when you get to the end of the day, like you can't really blame anybody else. It's not that life happened to you, it's you went out and you happened to life. We talk a lot about building an intentional culture and building, hiring the right kind of people. Jim Collins talks about that all the time, right? Get the right people on the bus, wrong people off the bus. Like when you're intentional about something, it's, no, I meant for that to happen. And if it didn't happen the way I wanted it to, then, I'm the one who needs to go fix it. Dave Ramsey says that all the time, right? Which is, hey, you're the biggest problem in your business, but guess what? You're also the best solution. And having that kind of ownership, I think it changes your outlook on life. It changes how you approach problems. When you realize that you have the ability to go and make a change, then you don't get to blame other people for any of your challenges and issues. And it just changes your whole outlook and ownership of that.
Yeah, that maximum responsibility. So you co-authored a book called The Fleet Success Playbook. I've got it here in my hand. Excellent read. I really, really enjoyed it. I picked up something and I want to quote you in it. It says, in the fleet industry, This is describing who the book is for. So it's people in the fleet industry, and you have a desire to grow beyond simply showing up at work. You want to make an impact. You've felt the weight of responsibility and stewardship that's been placed on your shoulders, and you want to make sure you do it right. First, I'll go on record as just saying this is one of the great examples of really calling out who something is for. So you did fantastic there. But I wanted to clarify something. What did you mean when you say that the person who this book is really for is someone who's felt the weight of responsibility and stewardship that's been placed on their shoulders? What did you have in mind when you guys wrote those specific words?
So when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about the person, that like they've been, a lot of us, when we got into fleet, we didn't grow up in high school and college and say, you know what I want to be? I want to be a fleet manager. Like we kind of stumble into it on accident and then we fall in love with it. But I've seen plenty of people out there that, yeah, fleet's it's another stop on the career path. Or, and I've met some of these managers and they're just, hey, I'm doing this so I can get to the next thing. And they don't really take ownership. They don't feel that weight. They don't really take that ownership and feel this responsibility to their people. They don't feel like they owe anything to anybody else, or like, how can we help them in their careers? It's more about what can I get from this? And so when we wrote this, we really were focused on, that second person, which is somebody who really believes that they can make a difference, that wants to make a difference, that has kind of assumed that mantle of responsibility instead of just seeing this as another stepping stone or another, step on the path to their greatness. I think you kind of see that in stewardship too. It's something that you are responsible for, that you are here to cultivate and grow and nurture, versus just manage and put your thumb on and dictate to, right? Those very different, one's very bottom up, the other's very top down. And we were really writing it for that person, that person that wants to grow and cultivate something instead of, leave their thumbprint on it.
Yeah, it makes me think of the person who stumbled into the job in 1984 as a shop hand, and now, like almost 40 years later, they're in a position of maybe middle management or something. I remember when I was selling parts, I would sometimes talk to a senior tech or a fleet maintenance manager, and maybe we'd be getting into a disagreement on what the cause of a problem was. And I remember one person emphatically saying, "I've been doing this for 30 years," and the only thing I could think to say to them was, "Well, maybe that's 5 years too long."
Right.
Yeah, you just get into it and it's like, what are you adding to our industry here?
And I think that was it too, right? It's like, what are you doing? What do you want to do to improve, to get better? You can't just keep doing things the same old way. You can't sit there and say, well, this is how I did it and this is how we've done it forever. Why do we need to change? When somebody has that sense of responsibility and stewardship, they recognize that, well, the world is changing around me and I have to adjust how I do business. I have to adjust my processes, my practices, so that we can keep doing this.
So in section 1 of the book, you use a case study from the city of Vancouver. Just clarifying, is that Vancouver, Canada or Washington?
Washington, not Canada.
I was hopeful that
I should have thought that it was Canada, right? But no.
Well, as a Canadian, and I used to live in Vancouver and sell parts, I actually sold parts to the city of Vancouver in Canada. So I was like, oh, if this is the fleet, I actually know who they're talking about. I think they probably need a little bit of help too. So we'll have to send them your book. But okay, so it was Vancouver, Washington. So what 3 main issues were they facing? And I guess the thing is that did you choose those 3 issues because they kind of represent the main issues most fleets are facing? So first of all, what are the 3? And secondly, is that what most fleets are up against?
Yeah. And if I recall, from my conversations with Dan over there at Vancouver, Washington, like they were struggling with just, cost overruns. They had, a bunch of, leaders that have come through that department before, and they weren't quite getting the support they needed. One of their big things was they hired a consulting agency that told them what they needed to do, and then they didn't do anything. They just kind of sat on it. And so he's sitting there looking at this like, well, wait a minute, like we've got this great system, we've got this great, process, like we just need to fix some things. And part of it too is the people, it was like, we just need to get some of this sense of ownership in our team and the pride. And we were lacking some of that. And so for him, he really did set about like, okay, well, what else is in this report? What else is missing? And so it was, getting cost under control. It was getting the team all aligned on the same vision. Where do we need to go? What's most important? How do we have and adopt for them? It was customer service. How do we get this really customer service mindset so that our customers feel taken care of and heard and listened to? And how do we get the shop more efficient? I think that most of us run into that all the time, which is getting the cost under control. How do we make sure that we're hitting our efficiencies and optimizing our processes?
That's so important. Whenever I think about optimizing your processes, I always think of the movie The Founder about Ray Kroc and the McDonald's brothers.
That's
And
a great movie.
Oh yeah, anybody who likes Michael Gerber has seen that movie. I think you and I have traveled in very similar circles for a long time. But there's a part in the movie where they actually go and like map out the kitchen at a tennis court with chalk. And they spent like 6 hours that day with a bunch of teenagers, like just practicing and optimizing. And nope, that doesn't work. And they moved, and it was, I mean, maybe there was a little Hollywood there to give us the gist of it. But the point is the McDonald's brothers, they said, look, it takes us 30 minutes right now in the restaurant industry to get this out. How can we get that down to 3 minutes? Then how can we get that down to 30 seconds? And they pulled it off, which is one of the reasons McDonald's became what it is. Of course, Ray Kroc is another huge reason, but we'll talk about that at another time. But the point being is that like you said, in this industry, we have sometimes gotten stuck in our own ways and our old ways, and we just like have not innovated the way we do things for a very long time. So that makes a lot of sense to me. One of the things I picked out in the book too is you talked about the importance of data, and certainly in the last few years, data has become more important than ever before. But you don't know what you don't know. So how do you know when you're putting bad data in the system? Because if you put bad data in, you're going to get bad results out, right? Like how do you identify that first and then correct it?
So my grandfather had a saying was that we overcode and we underreport. We spend so much time worrying about what goes in that we don't really think about what's coming out. And it really should go the other way. Whereas if we're trying to figure out how do I know if I'm putting in good data or not, I'll tell you is it really doesn't matter until you figure out what you're doing with it. And so my thing is always to look at, well, what data do you need to make the decisions you want to make? And really that's probably the first question is, well, what decisions do you need to make? And then you figure out what data, what reports do you need to run off of that? And then how do you get that data into that report? And that's where you kind of build that process. What ends up happening is there's a lot of tendency for us to, in his words, overcode, which is we want to put in all the data. One of two things happens. We either end up doing a lot of processes and data entry that's just wasted because we don't use that data on the back end, or the other side of it is we're putting in the wrong data because we don't understand what it's being used for on the back end. We see this a lot in telematics, actually, is that there's so much data coming off of the engine, but we're not doing anything with it. And so, everybody's out, well, we need all this data. We need this data. Okay, but why? And so in the book, we recommend, ask why 5 times. Why is this data important? Okay, well, why is that important? And really get down to the crux of what decision are you really trying to make? And that will help inform what data goes in. And then you can set up the policies and the practices and make sure that you have a good data flow process and you understand this is how we do our vehicle numbering, this is how we do our parts numbering, this is what this data looks like. And you can establish kind of good guides around what you're looking for because you understand the end result that you're trying to generate from that.
Yeah, parts people are very familiar with the application of the 80-20 rule for, Pareto's principle on distribution. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it's not just applicable to parts and things like that. It's also applicable to outcomes and the amount of data. Really that 20% of data will give you 80% of what you need to get the job done, right? So that law of distribution seems to hold constant no matter what we're talking about. We're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, we're going to continue our conversation. There's a few more points from the book I wanted to highlight. So we'll be right back. Don't have a heavy duty part number and need to look up a part? Go to parts.diesellaptops.com or download the app on Apple or Android to create your free account. Looking for high-quality fuel injection for heavy-duty applications? Having one supplier for fuel injection allows you to better serve customers by providing them with a complete line, which increases your sales and profitability. Learn more at ambackinternational.com/aftermarket. We're back from our break, and before the break, we were getting an introduction to this great book, The Fleet Success Playbook. If you're in the fleet business and you really feel a responsibility to make a difference in not only your fleet, but also the industry, this book is for you. Josh, thank you so much for being with us. The city of Vancouver, as a case study in section 1 of the book, made rapid improvement. Like they went from being having some real serious challenges to just like 3 years later, getting shortlisted on the 100 best fleets list in 2021. So if someone's working at a fleet right now, is that kind of turnaround typical? Is it possible for everyone? What's the average timeline if they start putting some of this stuff into action right away?
I'd say 3 years is good. Probably not average. It's probably better than average. It depends on how much buy-in you have and support you really have from your higher ups. You're coming into this as a fleet manager. How much sway do you have over the direction of the fleet? How much sway do you have over some of these decisions that are being made that could, in a city fleet, you may not have decision-making authority over what vehicles you get to buy. Well, that has a huge impact on your costs because now you've got a non-standardized fleet, which means that you have technicians that need all this other training and you have to have more inventory. And so you have to kind of look at that as how much support and how much decision-making authority do you have? How much control do you have over the people that you get to work with? Dan was able to go in and he had quite a bit of support. He had to go fight for some more support and kind of make the case for why fleet needed to be and why some of the changes they need to make needed to happen. But they were overall very supportive of what he was trying to do. He got his team behind him, and so he didn't have to make a ton of changes on the staff because they all kind of rallied behind the vision. But I'll tell you is that process can go anywhere from maybe 18 months to 2 years, like in a really good case, and it does take some time to start seeing some of the fruits of that. I've seen rebuilds that they might take 5-10 years. It depends on really like how fast you can afford to go. At RTA, we actually went through this process ourselves, kind of rebuilt the culture, revitalized the team. And, it took anywhere from 5 to 7 years, depending on when you want to start the clock. And a big part of that is, trying to figure out, well, who are we? And then, who's on the bus that shouldn't be on the bus, and how do we kind of slowly rotate those pieces out? We like to say it's, well, we're not firing anybody. We make them available to the market. I usually don't like to fire people. I like to inspire them to leave. And so we kind of go through that process with everybody, and we've picked our North Star. We got everybody aligned. And if you weren't aligned, we encouraged you and helped you find that next place to go. Because that's honestly the biggest drag that you will have doing any kind of initiative like this is going to be, it's a change process. And so it's going to be the people, because people resist change. It's just natural for us. It's scary. We don't necessarily want to jump right in and do something new and different. And so that's usually the biggest holdup is going to be people, it's getting them behind you, but also figuring out who's not going to get on board with this and getting them off and out of the way as fast as possible. And if you don't have the support of your higher ups, if you don't have the support or you don't have the ability, there's a lot of shops that are unionized and you just don't have the ability to move pieces around. Sometimes that can be really difficult. So it takes a longer time.
Yeah. And I definitely know with some people, it's not that they need to leave the company even. It's just that they're in the wrong job. They've got natural talent and skill and a personality profile that lends them to this job. And somehow they ended up over here. And if you can just get a couple people to swap, it's amazing the impact it can have.
Steve talked about that in the book a little bit. He had a gal that was working for him in accounting or she wanted to be in accounting, but she was working for him in fleet. And he was like, "You just seem miserable here." And she's like, "I am." And so just having that candid conversation, he was able to help get her into a new role, elsewhere in the organization. And we have that all the time. It's like, I don't really think you're cut out for this role, but you'd be wonderful over here. And that's always the second part of Jim Collins' thing. We always say right people on the bus, wrong people off. But right in between those two is right people on the bus in the right seats. Because they need to be where they need to be. They need to be in a good spot that leverages their strengths.
Yeah, well, try taking a really highly analytical accountant or an analytical technician and put them in an outbound sales role, or vice versa. Take this person who's ideally suited to be in an outbound sales role and stick them in an office by themselves, trying to do lots of detail work. It will not work for very long. Okay, so I've got the book here, and we talked about, as I was reading, I picked up the 4 pillars of fleet success, right? And so first of all, what are the 4 pillars? And why those things?
Yeah, so we broke down the 4 pillars as stakeholder satisfaction, intentional culture, resource efficiency, and risk management. And we kind of broke them all down. We have definitions for each of these 4, but basically stakeholder satisfaction is just figuring out who you impact, what on earth do they even expect out of your job and the job you're doing, and making sure that you're meeting those expectations. Intentional culture is about taking ownership of the type of environment, the type of people, the type of mission, right? Just owning that culture, and then going out and creating it. Resource efficiency all comes down to time and money, right? Those are our 2 most finite resources. We've got to make the most out of them. And then risk management is just all about being proactive, proactively identify, control, mitigate threats to the organization and its stakeholders. We sat down, those were the final 4 we ended up on, but there was a lot that were up on the whiteboard. We're trying to figure out, like, how would we make a model out of this? What are all the things that a fleet manager would really need to know and understand? And are there things that, as we looked at organizations like NAFA, ATA, APWA, like there's just a ton of associations out there that have done a great job with educating fleet professionals, but there's still some things missing from their vocabulary. And as we looked at it, we said, okay, well, this kind of fits here, and where would you put customer service? Well, that kind of goes here, and then we've got this other thing over here from, well, how do I know that we're doing a good job? And as a SaaS company, we're a software as a service business. There's things that we learn about that fleet has never heard of. And so we took things like NPS, our net promoter score. We took things like customer service, we call it CSATs. What's your customer satisfaction rating? And taking lessons like that and applying it to fleet. I said, okay, so how do these all fit together? And we're like, well, it really just comes about stakeholder satisfaction. It's job satisfaction. Trucking is going to have customers. A city government doesn't really have customers. They have taxpayers, and they have people that are really affected but aren't paying anything in that regards. And so that's where we kind of nailed down with, well, maybe stakeholder satisfaction is the right term there. And it kind of covers this broad umbrella, which is customer service, customer satisfaction, kind of this net promoter score of like evangelism. How much support do you have?
The book was published just in 2022, but we live in a truly dynamic time since the publishing of the book, and just what you've learned in that period of time between when the book got published and now. Is there anything else that needs to be said or added to the book to address these dynamic times that we live in? Or have you really found that the principles in the book are holding constant throughout this really challenging time we're living in right now?
The principles definitely are holding constant. I think if I were to go back, as soon as we wrote it, we had to get it published. And so if you've ever written a book, like there's definitely this thing of like the book kind of grows and grows, and it'll never be perfect enough. And so you just kind of have to say, nope, this is it. We're shipping it.
And you don't want to drop a 2,000-page book on
right? Like, well, here's a college
right?
textbook for you, right? That nobody wants to read. And it almost got that way a little bit. Like if you were to break out the sections right now, about half of that book is just spent on intentional culture. And so there is already in my mind, I'm like, well, the part 2 of that would probably be, let's spend more time in the other 3 pillars. But I try to think about, well, why was it that intentional culture took so much page space in that book? And it was because nobody has really talked about it in this industry before. And so it needed a lot more attention. But if I were to come back with a part 2, it'd be, let's give more tactics and get more plays that people could run in each of those 4 pillars. But overall, the principles, the pillars are the right pillars, and so looking at it, knowing what we know now, knowing what we know about, the fuel craziness that happened since we published it. Like when we were published, fuel was still, $2.50, $3 a gallon, which seems like a long time ago.
And don't we wish we could go back to that? we thought it was expensive when it was at that, and now we're just like, oh, please, could we go back to that?
Right. And so looking at those kind of things, like I look and say, oh, we could have given some more specific plays on how to deal with high fuel costs, how to deal with budget shortfalls, things of that nature. But the overall principles are still good. So awesome. Maybe a part 2, we'll do a little deeper dive.
Well, we want people to get access to the book. So what's the best way for people to do that?
Yeah. So for right now, easiest way is to go up to fleetsuccessplaybook.com. They can fill out a form, and we can send them a copy of the book. We are going to be having our second printing going out And so you'll probably see it up on Amazon. I know I'm slated to go record the Audible here at some point because I'm a big Audible
fantastic.
guy. I love listening to audiobooks, and so going out and recording the audio would be kind of the next step for us as well.
As soon as that's done, let me know, because I will re-listen to the whole book again, because I enjoyed reading it, but I love listening to Audible. Yeah, that's great.
So for now, just fleetsuccessplaybook.com, and you can fill it out there, and we'll get you in touch with what you need to get the book. So
we'll put that link in the show notes for everyone listening. You've been listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. My name is Jamie Irvin, and we've been with Josh Turley, the CEO of RTA Fleet and the co-author of the Fleet Success Playbook. To learn more about their software as a service, go to rtafleet.com, and the fleetsuccessplaybook.com is the link for the book. So we'll put both of those in the show notes. Josh, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today, and I absolutely love the book and recommend it to every fleet person out there.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for watching this video. Click here to subscribe to the Heavy Duty Parts Report YouTube channel, and click here to watch another great episode.